The concrete floor of Sector 4 smelled of hydraulic oil and unwashed bodies. I was Bob, the mute janitor, pushing a broom that had seen better days. I was invisible. That's the thing about holding a broom. People look right through you like you're part of the furniture. I was sweeping near the break area, hidden behind a stack of shipping pallets, when I saw them. Liam, a kid who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and Maria, a grandmotherly figure with tired eyes. Liam was staring at Maria's Tupperware container like it was a chest of gold. "Take half," she whispered, sliding a dry ham sandwich across the rusted table. "I'm not hungry." Liam shook his head, his hands trembling. "I can't, Maria. If Grim catches us sharing, he'll dock us both. Besides, I drank a lot of water. I'm full." I froze. I knew for a fact Liam hadn't eaten in 2 days. And I knew Maria was lying about not being hungry. In my boardroom, we talked about synergy. Here, on the factory floor, they were talking about survival. The panoramic windows of my corner office on the 42nd floor offered a view that real estate agents called breathtaking. Manhattan stretched out below like a circuit board of ambition, each light representing someone's dream, someone's struggle, someone's late night at the office. I'd worked in offices like those once, clawing my way up from nothing. Now I sat at the top, Robert Sterling, CEO of Sterling Heavy Industries, a manufacturing empire that employed 12,000 people across 6 states. The leather of my chair cost more than most people's monthly salary. That thought had never bothered me before. My assistant, Jennifer, knocked twice before entering. Always exactly twice, never more. She'd learned that in her first week 5 years ago. "Mr. Sterling, the quarterly reports from all facilities." She placed the stack of folders on my mahogany desk with practiced precision. Each folder represented a factory, a facility, a piece of my empire. I'd built this company from a single machine shop 30 years ago, when I was 25 and stupid enough to believe hard work was all that mattered. It still was all that mattered, wasn't it? "Thank you, Jennifer. Hold my calls for the next hour." She nodded and retreated, closing the door with a soft click that probably cost $50 in soundproofing materials. I opened the first folder. Sterling North Manufacturing Plant, my flagship facility, my pride and joy. The numbers were remarkable. Output up 17%. Costs down 12%. Profit margins that would make our shareholders weep with joy. But there was something else in the folder, something Jennifer had paperclipped to the front page. An envelope, plain white, no return address. My name was written in careful block letters, the handwriting of someone unaccustomed to writing by hand. I almost threw it away. We got crank letters all the time. Disgruntled employees, environmental activists, people who thought corporations were inherently evil. But something made me open it. The letter was written on cheap notebook paper, the kind with the ragged edge from being torn out of a spiral binding. The same careful block letters filled half a page. "Mr. Sterling, you don't know me. I'm nobody important, just another number in your factory. But I'm writing to you because I don't know who else to tell. We are dying down here. Not in the way you'd see on the news, not with explosions or dramatic accidents. We're dying slowly, one shift at a time, one missed meal at a time, one stolen paycheck at a time. Your plant manager, Silas Grimm, is running Sterling North like his personal kingdom. He docks our pay for imaginary infractions. He charges us for safety equipment that OSHA says should be free. He removes safety guards from machines to speed up production. Yesterday, Marcus lost 3 fingers. Grimm fired him for bleeding on the product. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look. Come see for yourself what happens in your factory when you're not watching." A friend. I read it twice. Then a third time. My first instinct was to call Grimm, to have him investigate and report back. Silas Grimm had been running Sterling North for 8 years. Under his management, the facility had gone from underperforming to being our most profitable plant. The board loved him. The shareholders loved him. I'd personally authorized his last 3 bonuses. But something about the letter nagged at me. Maybe it was the detail about Marcus and his fingers, something specific enough to be verified. Maybe it was the tone, not angry or demanding, just exhausted. Or maybe it was the ghost of my younger self, the kid who'd worked in factories like Sterling North, who'd known what it felt like to be just another number. I picked up my phone and dialed, not Grimm, but someone else entirely. "Harrison? It's Robert Sterling. I need you to pull some records for me. Workers' comp claims for Sterling North over the last 6 months." And I want the raw data, not the summary reports. Harrison Chun, my head of legal, knew better than to ask questions when I used that tone. I'll have them on your desk in an hour. Send them to my personal email. And Harrison? Not a word to anyone. After I hung up, I walked to the window and stared out at the city. Somewhere out there, in a factory bearing my name, people might be suffering. People I was responsible for, even if I'd never met them, even if I couldn't pick them out of a crowd. The question was, did I have the courage to find out the truth? The data Harrison sent me was damning. 43 workers' compensation claims in 6 months from a facility with only 200 employees. That was a rate nearly 7 times higher than our other plants. Injuries ranging from minor cuts to severe burns, crushed limbs, toxic chemical exposure. But what really caught my attention was the pattern in the settlements. Every single claim had been settled quickly, quietly, with non-disclosure agreements attached. The amounts were generous enough to seem like we cared, but small enough that they wouldn't trigger any flags with the insurance company or the board. Someone was systematically covering something up. I spent 3 days planning. I couldn't just show up at Sterling North and demand answers. Grimm would sanitize everything before I walked through the door. The corporate visit playbook was well established. Advance notice, facility cleaned up, best workers on display, problems hidden behind fresh paint and forced smiles. No, if I wanted the truth, I needed to see what happened when no one knew I was watching. The idea came to me on the 3rd night, as I sat in my penthouse apartment eating a dinner that cost more than some people made in a week. I'd started as a floor worker. I knew how invisible certain jobs were, how people looked right through janitors, maintenance workers, the people who cleaned up everyone else's mess. I could become invisible. The transformation took planning. I started by calling in sick to the office, something I'd done maybe twice in 30 years. Then I drove not to Sterling North, but to a small town 200 miles north, a place where no one knew Robert Sterling, the CEO. At a thrift store that smelled of mothballs and disappointment, I bought clothes I would have thrown away without a second thought. Worn jeans with permanent stains, a faded flannel shirt with a torn pocket, steel-toed boots that had seen better decades. The total came to $37. The cashier, a tired woman with kind eyes, gave me a look of sympathy as she bagged my purchases. "You doing okay, honey?" she asked. I realized she thought I was homeless, down on my luck, buying work clothes for a job I desperately needed. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't felt like a punch to the gut. "Getting by," I said, which was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. Back in the motel room I'd rented, $49 a night, the kind of place where you didn't want to look too closely at the bedspread. I studied myself in the mirror. Robert Sterling, CEO, stared back. Expensive haircut, manicured nails, skin that said country club membership, and executive gym. I took out the electric clippers I'd bought. 20 minutes later, my silver hair lay in the cheap motel sink, and my head was covered in uneven stubble. I hadn't cut my own hair since I was 20. The result looked exactly like what it was, a desperate attempt at a DIY haircut by someone who had no idea what they were doing. Perfect. I used sandpaper, actual sandpaper from a hardware store, to rough up my hands, creating calluses and worn spots that might pass for a lifetime of manual labor. I hadn't realized how soft my hands had become, how divorced from the physical world I'd let myself become. The final touch was the teeth. I'd found a theatrical makeup kit online that included a substance to create the appearance of decay and staining. Applied carefully, it made my teeth look like those of someone who'd never been able to afford regular dental care, someone who'd learned to live with pain because the dentist was a luxury for people with better insurance. When I was done, I looked at myself in the mirror again. The man staring back wasn't Robert Sterling. He was Bob, nobody special, just another body looking for work, grateful for whatever scraps he could get. I practiced the stoop, the way of walking that said, "My back hurts, but I can't afford to stop working." I practiced keeping my eyes down, making myself small, forgettable. Then I drove to Sterling North. The Sterling North manufacturing plant sat like a gray fortress on the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by similar buildings that all looked vaguely threatening under the overcast sky. I'd seen pictures of it, of course, approved architectural renderings and official photographs. But I'd never actually been here in person. It was too far from corporate headquarters, too low on the priority list when there were board meetings and investor calls and all the other things that fill the CEO's calendar. Now, Pulling into the employee parking lot in my 15-year-old Honda, purchased cash from a used car lot the day before. I saw it the way my workers saw it every day, massive, impersonal, vaguely menacing. The parking lot was nearly full despite the early hour, 5:47 a.m., according to the clock on my dashboard. The first shift started at 6 o'clock. Workers emerged from their cars with the shuffling gait of the exhausted, carrying lunch boxes and thermoses, already looking tired before the day even began. I followed the crowd to the main entrance, keeping my head down, my shoulders hunched. No one looked at me. No one cared about one more warm body showing up to sell their hours for money. The hiring office was exactly what I'd expected. Industrial beige walls, fluorescent lights that flickered irregularly, a desk staffed by a woman who looked like she'd stopped caring about her job sometime during the Clinton administration. "Help you?" she asked without looking up from her computer. "Looking for work," I said, keeping my voice rough, adding a slight slur that suggested maybe a minor stroke, maybe just a hard life. "Heard you might be hiring. Can you pass a drug test?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you lift 50 pounds repeatedly?" "Yes, ma'am." She finally looked at me, her assessment clinical and brief. I saw her catalog everything: the stubbled head, the worn clothes, the broken teeth, the desperate need for employment that came off me like a smell. "We've got an opening in sanitation. Minimum wage, no benefits for the first 90 days, paid weekly. You'll report to Foreman Krell. Don't be late. Don't talk back. Don't cause problems. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." She slid a form across the desk. "Fill this out. We need a name, social security number, emergency contact." I'd prepared for this. I had a fake identity, courtesy of a private investigator I'd hired with the instruction to make me disappear into the system. On paper, I was Robert Morrison, recently released from a minimum security facility, nothing violent, just some bad checks, no fixed address, desperate for a second chance. It took me 15 minutes to fill out the form, deliberately writing slowly, carefully, like someone who wasn't used to paperwork. When I handed it back, she barely glanced at it. "Welcome to Sterling North, Morrison. Don't make me regret this." Foreman Krell found me 20 minutes later in the locker room, where I was changing into the uniform they'd given me. Gray coveralls with Sterling North stenciled across the back in faded letters, so worn that some previous workers' sweat stains were permanent fixtures in the fabric. Krell was exactly what you'd get if you ordered a factory bully from Central Casting. 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle gone soft around the middle, a face that suggested he'd been punched a lot and enjoyed punching back more. His eyes were small and mean, the eyes of someone who discovered that cruelty was an acceptable substitute for competence. "You Morrison?" he barked. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the floor. "I asked you a question. When I ask you a question, you answer with words. You got a tongue." "Yes, sir. I'm Morrison. You're going to be in sanitation. That means you clean up everyone else's shit. Literally, sometimes. You got a problem with that?" "No, sir. You don't talk unless spoken to. You don't look at the machines unless you're cleaning them. You don't talk to the floor workers unless they ask you a direct question. You're not here to make friends. You're not here to have opinions. You're here to push a broom and take out trash. You understand?" "Yes, sir." He stepped closer, invading my personal space in the way bullies do, using his size to intimidate. I could smell his breakfast: eggs and sausage, coffee with too much cream. The smell turned my stomach, not because of the food, but because I knew what was coming next. "You fuck up, you're gone. You're late, you're gone. You even look at me wrong, you're gone. There's 50 guys who'd kill for your job, so don't think you're special. You're nothing. You're dirt. And dirt is replaceable. Got it?" Every instinct I had screamed at me to put this man in his place, to tell him exactly who I was and watch the color drain from his face. But that would defeat the purpose. So I swallowed my pride, my anger, my disgust, and did what people who needed this job would do. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." Krell smiled, the smile of someone who'd just established dominance, who'd just reminded himself why he liked this job. "Good. Now get out there, and don't fuck up on your first day. Or any day." The factory floor was hell. I'd worked in factories before, decades ago, when I was building this company from nothing. But I'd forgotten, or maybe I'd let myself forget, what it was really like. The noise hit me first, a constant assault of grinding metal, hydraulic hisses, pneumatic hammers, all of it echoing off the concrete walls and steel ceiling until it became a physical presence that made your teeth ache. The heat came next. Despite the freezing temperature outside, the factory floor was sweltering, the air thick with the smell of machine oil, hot metal, and human sweat. The ventilation system, which I'd approved a budget for just 2 years ago, was either not working or not adequate for the job. I was given a push broom, a rolling trash barrel, and a route that covered the entire factory floor. My job was to sweep up metal shavings, collect trash, clean up spills, unclog drains. Basically, everything that was too dirty or too demeaning for anyone else to do. And in doing so, I became invisible. It's a strange thing, invisibility. As Robert Sterling, people noticed when I entered a room. Conversations paused. Postures straightened. Everyone wanted my attention, my approval, my time. But as Bob Morrison, the janitor, I might as well have been a ghost. People walked around me without acknowledgement. Conversations continued as if I wasn't there. I was part of the machinery, no more worth noticing than a conveyor belt or a drill press. And because I was invisible, people talked freely around me. I heard workers complaining about the heat, about the broken safety equipment, about the way Grimm would dock their pay for being 30 seconds late, but never paid overtime when they were forced to stay past their shift. I saw things that made my blood run cold. Safety guards that had been removed from machines because they slowed down production. First aid kits that were locked up to prevent theft. A water fountain that had been broken for 3 weeks because ordering a replacement part wasn't in this quarter's budget. But the worst part was watching the people. These were my employees, people who worked for a company I'd built, and they moved like prisoners serving a sentence. No one smiled. No one laughed. They came in, they worked their machines with mechanical precision, and they left, day after day, trading their hours for money that apparently wasn't enough to live on. I was sweeping near the main production line when I witnessed my first accident. A young man, early 20s, Hispanic, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work and not enough food, was operating a metal press. The machine required two-handed activation as a safety feature, but someone had rigged it so one hand could operate it, presumably to speed up production. He was working too fast, probably trying to meet some impossible quota. His hand slipped. The press came down on his fingers. His scream cut through even the factory noise. Blood spurted from his hand, bright red against the gray metal. Workers nearby froze, horror on their faces, but no one moved to help. They'd learned not to. Krell appeared within seconds, moving faster than I would have thought possible for a man his size. But he didn't go to help the injured worker. He didn't call for first aid. Instead, he grabbed the young man by the collar and yanked him away from the machine. "You fucking idiot. Look what you did. You got blood all over the product." The young man was cradling his mangled hand, tears streaming down his face, in too much shock to even respond. "Clean this up," Krell barked at another worker. Then he turned to the injured man. "You, get out. You're fired, and you're paying for the product you ruined. We'll send you a bill." I couldn't help myself. I took a step forward, my mouth opening to intervene. Then I caught myself. If I stepped in now, if I revealed who I was, I'd save this one man, but lose any chance of seeing what was really happening here. The cleanup would begin, the cover-up would start, and justice would slip away like water through my fingers. So I stood there, gripping my broom hard enough to make my knuckles white, and watched as they threw an injured man out of my factory while charging him for his own accident. The young man's name, I later learned, was Oscar Ramirez. He was 23. He'd been working at Sterling North for 2 years. His mangled hand would never fully recover, and he'd spend the next 6 months fighting our lawyers just to get his workers' compensation claim processed. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I'd just witnessed something evil happen in a building that bore my name, and I'd done nothing to stop it. Welcome to Sterling North, Bob Morrison. Welcome to hell. I saw Silas Grimm for the first time on my 3rd day undercover. He arrived at exactly 8:47 a.m. I'd learned to track time by the factory whistle that marked breaks and shift changes. Driving a Porsche Cayenne in metallic black that probably cost more than most of the workers made in 2 years. He parked it directly in front of the main entrance, in a fire lane clearly marked "No parking," as if traffic laws were suggestions for ordinary people, but not for him. From my position sweeping the area near the entrance, I watched him emerge. Grimm was 54 according to his file, but he'd kept himself in shape with the kind of aggressive fitness that wealthy men pursue when they've got something to prove. His suit was bespoke, probably Italian, the kind that cost $5,000 and announced to everyone that you had $5,000 to spend on a suit. But it was his eyes that struck me. Cold, calculating eyes that assessed everything in terms of value extracted versus cost incurred. He looked at the factory the way a farmer might look at cattle, useful, valuable, but ultimately just assets to be exploited. He walked past me without a glance, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and aggressive, the olfactory equivalent of a firm handshake that goes on too long. I continued sweeping, tracking his progress through the entrance. Through the windows, I could see him stop at the security desk, not to check in, but to chew out the security guard for some perceived infraction. Even from outside, I could see the guard's shoulders hunch, his head bow, his posture scream submission. That was Grimm's gift, making people feel small. At 10 a.m., the morning break whistle blew, 15 minutes for workers to use the restroom, grab water, exist as human beings for a brief moment before returning to the machines. I'd learned to use these breaks to position myself near high-traffic areas where people talked freely. Today, I was near the loading dock when I heard Grimm's voice carrying from the supervisor's office, door open, not caring who heard. I don't care if it's hot. You know what's hotter? Unemployment. You know what's colder? The street. They can complain about the temperature when they're paying the electric bill. I moved closer, using my broom as cover, sweeping the same area over and over. OSHA's been sniffing around again, another voice said. I recognized it as Terry, one of the shift supervisors, a company man through and through. They got an anonymous complaint about the ventilation system. Grimm's laugh was sharp and humorless. Of course they did. Some winter probably got a little dizzy from the fumes and decided to rat us out instead of toughening up. Here's what you do. When OSHA shows up, and they will show up, you make sure every fan in the place is running, every window is open, and the production floor looks like a goddamn safety convention. After they leave, things go back to normal. What about the broken extractors in the paint booth? What about them? You know how much those cost to replace. 40 grand for a system we'll use maybe 3 hours a day. That money comes out of our bonus pool. Terry, you want to explain to the team why their Christmas bonus got cut in half because we had to buy some fancy air cleaners. There was a pause. No, sir. That's what I thought. Listen, corporate's been riding my ass about costs. They want the same output with less overhead. You know how we do that. We work smarter, not harder. We cut the fat. We eliminate waste. And if a few people can't handle the pace, well, that's what the door is for. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Good. Now get back out there. I want production up 5% this month. I don't care how you do it. Cut corners, skip breaks, I don't give a shit. Just hit the numbers. I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly moved away, pushing my broom toward another area. Terry emerged looking pale and stressed. Grimm came out right behind him, already on his phone. Jenkins? Grimm. Listen, I need you to backdate some maintenance records for me. OSHA's coming. Yeah, the ventilation system. Just make it look like we've been keeping up with the inspections. I don't care how you do it, just do it. That's what I pay you for. He hung up without saying goodbye and nearly walked into me. Watch it, he snapped, as if I'd been the one in his way. I kept my head down, mumbled an apology, and shuffled away. But not before I saw him pull out a different phone, his personal cell, and check something that made him smile. From where I stood, I could just make out the screen. A banking app, showing a recent deposit of $127,000. His quarterly bonus. Money that came from cutting costs, from skipping safety measures, from squeezing every possible dollar out of the operation regardless of the human cost. Blood money. I first noticed Liam Chun on my 4th day. He was hard to miss. Not because he stood out, but because he was disappearing. 22 years old according to the employee roster I'd memorized before going undercover. Liam operated one of the large hydraulic presses in Sector 4, the noisiest, hottest part of the factory. He'd been with Sterling North for 11 months, which made him practically a veteran by current standards. The turnover rate I discovered was astronomical, 60% in the first year, which meant most workers didn't make it past month 7. But Liam was still here, and watching him work, I understood why. He was fast, efficient, precise. His hands moved with practiced economy, positioning metal sheets, activating the press, removing the formed parts, all in a rhythm that never stopped. In my old life, I would have called him a model employee, but there was something wrong. He was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked almost translucent under the harsh factory lights. His coveralls hung loose on a frame that should have carried more weight. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of exhaustion so profound it had become a permanent state. And he was swaying. It was subtle at first, just a slight unsteadiness as he reached for the next metal sheet. But I'd been watching him for 2 hours now, and the sway was getting worse. He was operating a machine that could crush a human skull like an eggshell, and he looked like he might collapse at any moment. During the lunch break, I positioned myself near the employee break area. Calling it a break room would have been generous. It was just a section of the warehouse with a few tables and chairs that looked like rejects from a bankrupt school cafeteria. Liam sat alone at the furthest table, his head resting on his crossed arms. He had no lunch, no drink, nothing. He just sat there, motionless, like he was trying to conserve every possible calorie of energy. I pulled my own lunch from my bag, a sandwich I'd made that morning from the cheapest bread and bologna I could find, trying to approximate what my workers might be able to afford. Even this pathetic meal felt like a luxury watching Liam. I moved closer, using the pretense of wiping down tables. The other workers gave me space. Janitors were practically invisible, but I made sure to work my way toward where Liam sat. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice rough, concerned but not intrusive. Liam's head snapped up, and I saw a flash of panic in his eyes. "I'm fine. Not sleeping well, but I'm fine." Up close, I could see he wasn't fine. His lips were cracked from dehydration. His hands trembled slightly. His eyes had a feverish brightness that came from pushing a body far past its limits. "When's the last time you ate?" I asked quietly. I had breakfast. "I'm good." It was a lie, and we both knew it. I reached into my bag and pulled out an apple I'd brought. Nothing fancy, just a regular apple from the corner store, and set it on the table. "Take it. I'm not hungry." Liam stared at the apple like I'd offered him a bar of gold. His hand actually reached for it before he jerked it back. "I can't. I'm on a diet. Trying to lose weight." Looking at him, the idea that he needed to lose weight was laughable. He was already too thin, his body consuming itself for fuel. "Suit yourself," I said, and turned to walk away. But I left the apple on the table. When I glanced back 2 minutes later, Liam was holding it, turning it over in his hands like he was trying to memorize its weight and shape. Then, with a look of such profound guilt it broke my heart, he took a bite. He ate that apple like it was the first food he'd seen in days. Which, I was starting to suspect it was. Later that shift, I made it a point to observe Liam more closely. I timed my sweeping to coincide with his work area, staying just close enough to watch without being obvious. At 2:47 p.m., he nearly dropped a 20-pound metal sheet. His grip failed, the sheet slipped, and only his reflexes saved him from a crushed foot. He caught it inches from the floor, but the effort left him shaking, leaning against the press for support. Krell appeared like a shark smelling blood. "Problem, Chun?" "No, sir. Just lost my grip for a second." "Lost your grip? That piece cost us $12. You drop it, you damage it, that comes out of your paycheck. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "I don't think you do. You've been sloppy all week. You're falling behind quota. You think I don't notice? You think I don't keep track?" Krell pulled out a clipboard, flipping through pages. "You're down 8% from last week. That's unacceptable." "I'll do better, sir." "You're damn right you will. Consider this a written warning. One more and you're out. And good luck finding another job around here. I'll make sure every factory within 50 miles knows you're unreliable." Liam's face went even paler. "Please, sir. I need this job. I'll hit quota, I promise." Krell smiled, the smile of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "Then I suggest you skip your breaks and make up the difference. And Chun, that apple some idiot gave you? Food on the floor is a health violation. That'll be a $20 fine, deducted from your next paycheck." I watched Krell walk away, fighting the urge to follow him and break every bone in his smug face. $20. He was fining a starving man $20 for accepting a piece of fruit. When my shift ended at 6 p.m., I didn't go back to my motel. Instead, I waited in my car in the parking lot, watching. Liam emerged at 6:43, 43 minutes after his shift should have ended. Unpaid time, I was sure, making up his quota deficit. He walked to a bus stop a quarter-mile from the factory. No car, because of course he couldn't afford a car. I waited until the bus came, then followed it in my Honda. Liam got off in a neighborhood that real estate agents would call economically challenged, and everyone else would call the bad part of town. He walked into an apartment building that should have been condemned years ago, the kind of place where the elevator was permanently broken and the hallways smelled of desperation and broken dreams. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at that building, thinking about the Porsche Cayenne that Silas Grimm drove, thinking about the 42nd floor penthouse where Robert Sterling lived, thinking about the distance between those worlds and how I'd somehow forgotten it existed. Friday came, and with it, payday. In my corporate life, money appeared in my account through direct deposit, numbers on a screen that grew larger every 2 weeks without me having to think about it. Here at Sterling North, they still did paper checks, handed out in plain envelopes at the end of the shift. I collected mine from the payroll window. Bob Morrison had worked 43 hours at $9.50 an hour, which came to $408.50 before taxes. After deductions, my take-home was $304.17 for a week of backbreaking labor. $304. I spent more than that on a single business lunch. But I noticed I wasn't the only one staring at my check with a sick feeling in my stomach. All around me, workers were opening their envelopes with expressions that ranged from resignation to despair. "They got me again," one man muttered, showing his check to his coworker. "Look at this. Equipment rental fee, $45. I didn't rent any equipment. They charge us for using the tools," his coworker explained wearily. "Been doing it for months. You complain, they fire you. You don't complain, they keep taking." "But that's illegal." "Yeah? You want to get a lawyer? You got lawyer money?" I didn't think so. I moved through the crowd, listening, observing. The pattern became clear quickly. Everyone's paycheck had mysterious deductions. Equipment rental, uniform maintenance, safety gear allocation, cleaning fee, amounts ranging from $20 to $100, all adding up to a systematic theft of wages that was being hidden in plain sight. Then I saw Liam. He was standing by the payroll window, holding his envelope like it might explode. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open it. When he finally got the check out, he stared at it for a long moment, his face going from pale to gray to something that looked like ash. Then he started to cry. Not loud, dramatic crying. Just silent tears running down his face while he stared at a piece of paper that represented a week of his life. I moved closer, positioning myself where I could see over his shoulder. The check was made out to Liam Chun for $287.50, already low for a 40-hour week on what should have been $12.50 an hour, the posted rate for machine operators. But there were deductions: $75 for equipment rental fee, $50 for damage to company property, the metal sheet he'd nearly dropped, $30 for safety violation, the apple, and $20 for uniform infractions. After taxes, his take-home was $87.43. $87 for 40 hours of work, plus the extra unpaid time he'd put in to meet quota. Liam walked on unsteady legs to where Krell stood, holding court with a clipboard and a smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. "Sir," Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, there's a mistake on my check." Krell didn't even look up from his clipboard. "No mistake. You damaged company property. You violated safety regulations. Actions have consequences, Chun." "But sir, I can't. I need this money. My daughter needs medicine. I need to buy formula. I can't." "Then you should have thought about that before you got sloppy with your work." Krell finally looked up, his expression bored. "You don't like the deductions? There's a simple solution. Do better. Follow the rules. Or quit. Your choice. Please, sir. I'm begging you. Just this once." "Are you arguing with me, Chun?" Krell's voice went dangerous. "Because I can add insubordination to your list of infractions. That's another $100 fine. You want to keep going?" Liam's shoulders slumped in defeat. "No, sir. That's what I thought. Now get out of here. You're depressing everyone." I watched Liam walk away, still holding that check, still crying silent tears. Other workers avoided looking at him, their own defeats too fresh to offer sympathy. And then I watched Krell, who was chuckling to himself while making notes on his clipboard. He caught one of his supervisor buddies walking by and called out, "Hey, Gary, just made quota for my bonus this month. Drinks are on me tonight." They laughed together, two men celebrating a financial victory built on the systematic theft of wages from people who couldn't fight back. I had to leave. I had to get out of there before I did something that would blow my cover. I clocked out, walked to my car on legs that felt disconnected from my body, and drove. I didn't go back to my motel. I drove to an empty parking lot and sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. $87. A man with a baby daughter took home $87 for a week of dangerous, exhausting work, while Silas Grimm drove a Porsche and celebrated hitting his bonus quota. While I lived in a penthouse and spent more on a single meal than Liam made in a week. I pulled out my phone, almost called my head of legal, almost ended this charade right then and there. But I stopped, because I realized that firing Grimm, fixing this one plant, wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand how deep this went, how systemic this problem was. And I needed to see if there was anything left of my humanity, buried somewhere under 30 years of corporate success and moral compromise. The check in my wallet said I'd earned $304.17 this week. I folded it carefully and put it away. I wouldn't cash it. I'd keep it as a reminder of what my company had become, and what I needed to do about it. Monday morning brought rain, the kind of cold, penetrating drizzle that made every surface slippery and turned the walk from the parking lot to the factory into a miserable slog. Workers hurried through the downpour with their heads down, some with cheap plastic ponchos, some with nothing but their jackets pulled over their heads, all of them getting soaked. The factory wasn't heated, not really. There was warmth from the machines, heat from the industrial processes, but nothing deliberate, nothing meant for human comfort. So everyone arrived wet and cold, facing a 10-hour shift in damp clothes. I'd positioned myself that morning for janitorial work in Sector 4, the area where Liam worked. I'd been watching him all week, and what I saw had been getting worse. He'd lost more weight, his movements had slowed, and twice I'd seen him lean against his machine with his eyes closed, swaying on his feet. He was running on empty. And today, I was going to find out why. The lunch break came at noon. The whistle blew, and the machines went silent. That blessed, brief silence that was probably the best part of these workers' day. People shuffled toward the break area, pulling out lunchboxes and thermoses, claiming their usual spots at the battered tables. I was sweeping near the area behind the generator, a dark corner that had become a kind of unofficial break zone for people who wanted privacy. It was shielded from the main floor by stacks of shipping pallets, just out of Krell's direct line of sight. Liam was there, sitting on an overturned bucket, his head in his hands, his shoulders hunched. No lunchbox, no thermos, nothing. I watched as Maria Gonzalez approached him. Maria was 58, a veteran of the assembly line who'd been at Sterling North for 23 years, longer than anyone else on the floor. She'd seen the company change, seen the good times and the descent into whatever this had become. Maria was the kind of woman people instinctively called mama or abuela, with soft features that had been hardened by 2 decades of factory work but never lost their fundamental kindness. She wore her gray hair in a practical bun and moved with the steady determination of someone who'd learned that the only way through life was to keep putting one foot in front of the other. She sat down across from Liam on another bucket, setting her lunch on a rusted metal table between them. I kept sweeping, keeping my back to them but angling myself so I could hear. Liam, Maria's voice was gentle. Mijo, you need to eat. I'm okay, Maria. I'm just tired. Don't lie to me. When's the last time you had a meal? Silence. Liam. Answer me. Saturday night. I made rice. It was fine. I'm fine. Today was Monday. He hadn't eaten in more than 36 hours. Maria opened her Tupperware container. Inside was a sandwich, bologna on white bread, the edges already curling despite being wrapped in plastic. Next to it, an apple that had a soft spot and a small bag of generic potato chips. It was the kind of lunch that spoke of a careful budget, of shopping at discount stores, of making every dollar stretch. But Maria looked at it like it was a feast meant for sharing. She took out a plastic knife and began sawing the sandwich in half. Maria, no. Liam's voice cracked. That's your lunch. I'm not hungry. Yes, you are. I can hear your stomach from here. Then we'll both eat. Take half. She pushed the sandwich half toward him across the table. Liam stared at it like it was a temptation he couldn't afford. I can't. If Grimm sees us sharing food, he'll fine us both. He calls it unauthorized distribution of resources or some bullshit. Please, Maria. I can't be responsible for you getting in trouble. Grim's not here. Take it. I can't. I drank a lot of water before break. I'm full. I'm fine. It was such an obvious lie, such a transparent attempt to maintain some shred of pride, that it hurt to hear. Maria's voice went firm, taking on the tone of a mother who wouldn't accept any more arguments. Liam Chun, I am 58 years old, and I have seen every type of stubbornness there is. You are not fine. You are starving, and I will not sit here and watch you starve when I have food to share. Now take the sandwich, or I swear to God I will shove it down your throat myself. Liam's hands were shaking as he reached for the half sandwich. You need it too. You can't work on an empty stomach. I've been working on an empty stomach longer than you've been alive. One more day won't kill me. You, on the other hand. She left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. Liam took the sandwich, and for a moment, he just held it. Then he brought it to his mouth and took a bite. And then another. And then he was eating with the kind of desperate hunger that made it clear this wasn't just a missed meal. This was ongoing, systematic starvation. Maria watched him eat with an expression that broke my heart. Satisfaction that he was eating, yes, but also profound sadness, like she was watching a child suffer and could do nothing more than offer this one small band-aid on a wound that needed surgery. When Liam finished, he was crying again. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Maria. I'll pay you back. Stop. You don't owe me anything. The check on Friday. They took almost everything. I had to buy formula for Sophia. I had to pay the electric bill, or they'd shut it off. I thought I'd have enough for food. But then the landlord said he's raising the rent, and I don't know what to do. I work 40 hours a week, 50 hours some weeks, and I still can't feed my daughter and myself. Maria reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from years of repetitive work, scarred from small injuries that came with assembly line labor. But her grip was gentle. How much did they take this time? Almost $200. Made up fines. Grim said I was 3 minutes late on Tuesday. I wasn't. I clocked in early. But he said his watch showed different, so it's a $50 fine for tardiness. Then he said my workstation was unacceptably cluttered, even though I clean it every night. Another 50. And on and on. Can you talk to HR? Liam laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. HR? Maria, HR is one person, and she reports directly to Grim. Filing a complaint is just asking to get fired. What about corporate? Someone above Grim. And tell them what? That I think I'm being treated unfairly? They'll ask for proof. Grim will say I'm a disgruntled employee making false accusations. They'll believe him because he saves them money, and I'll be out on my ass with a reputation that'll make me unemployable. I stood there, frozen, listening to this conversation and feeling something crack inside me. Because Liam was right. If he'd called corporate, called HR, sent a letter to the CEO, to me, we would have dismissed it. We would have believed Grim. We would have protected the manager who made the numbers look good, not the worker with no leverage and no proof. The system was designed to protect people like Grim, and I'd built that system. Maria split her apple in half as well, giving Liam the bigger piece. What about your parents? Can they help? My dad died last year. Heart attack. Mom's in a nursing home with dementia. I'm paying for that too. Sophia's mother is. She's not in the picture. It's just me. And I'm failing. I'm working as hard as I can, and it's not enough. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make this work. His voice broke on the last word, and he put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maria got up and walked around the table, putting her arms around him in a gesture of comfort that was so purely maternal it made my throat tight. You're not failing. The system is failing you. Do you hear me? This is not your fault. Then whose fault is it? Liam's voice was muffled against her shoulder. Because someone must be responsible. Someone decided that the price of my labor is worth less than what it costs to live. Someone decided that I can work full-time and still starve. Someone made these choices. Yes, I thought. Someone did. Me. I'd been so focused on growth, on expansion, on quarterly returns and shareholder value, that I'd lost sight of the human cost. I'd approved budgets that cut labor costs. I'd celebrated managers who found efficiencies. I'd created a system that rewarded people like Grim for squeezing every possible dollar out of operations, and I'd never once asked what that squeezing looked like on the ground level. I turned my workers into numbers on a spreadsheet. And numbers don't need to eat. I stood there with my broom, watching Maria comfort a young man who was starving while working at my factory, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not just anger at Grimm, though that was there, burning hot and bright, but something deeper. Shame. Profound, soul-deep shame at what I'd become, what I'd let this company become. In my boardroom, we talked about maximizing efficiency and optimizing resource allocation. Here, in the dark corner behind the generator, they were talking about survival. Maria finally released Liam and stepped back. Listen to me. You keep working, you keep showing up, you keep being the good man you are. And in the meantime, you take this. She pulled something from her pocket, a worn envelope with some bills inside. I know it's not much, but no. Liam pushed it away. No, Maria. I can't take your money. You need it. I'm old. I don't need much. My kids are grown. My rent is cheap because I've been in the same apartment for 30 years. You have a baby. Take it. Maria. Take it. Or I'll tell Krell you made inappropriate comments to me. Liam's eyes went wide with shock, then understanding. She was joking, sort of, but the underlying message was clear. She would find a way to make him take the money, one way or another. He took the envelope with shaking hands. I'll pay you back. I know you will. But not until you're back on your feet. Now eat your apple, and then get back out there. And Liam, you're going to make it through this. I promise. I watched them sit in silence for the rest of the break, Maria eating her half of the sandwich in small bites that she chewed thoroughly, making it last. Making sure Liam didn't feel guilty for taking food she clearly needed too. When the whistle blew and the break ended, they stood together. Maria straightened Liam's collar like a mother sending her son off to school, and then they walked back to their stations. I stayed behind in the dark corner, still gripping my broom. Then I walked to the bathroom and vomited. Not from illness, but from rage. From shame. From the horrible realization that I was the monster in this story. Not Grimm. He was just a symptom. I was the disease. I'd built this. Every policy, every budget cut, every emphasis on efficiency over humanity had led directly to this moment. A grandmother giving her lunch to a starving young father while working at a factory that bore my name. I stood over the toilet, my body shaking, and made a decision. This ended now. Not with a phone call to legal. Not with a memo to HR. Not with a measured, corporate response that would result in some minor policy changes and a few sacrifices to protect the system. This ended with me taking responsibility. With me fixing what I'd broken. With me facing the people I'd failed and making it right. I washed my face in the sink, looking at myself in the mirror. Bob Morrison stared back. The fake stubble, the theatrical dental work, the stooped posture. But underneath, I saw Robert Sterling. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't like what I saw. No more, I said to my reflection. No more. The afternoon shift was about to start. I had work to do. But first, I had to blow my cover. The afternoon shift started with the usual chaos. Machines grinding to life. Metal screaming against metal. The temperature climbing as the rain outside turned the factory into a humid oven. I went back to my station, went back to sweeping, but my mind was racing with plans. I needed proof. Hard evidence that would stand up in court, that couldn't be explained away or buried by corporate lawyers. I'd seen the wage theft, witnessed the safety violations, heard Grimm's callous calculations, but I needed documentation. I'd been photographing things with a small camera hidden in my belt buckle, safety violations, missing guards, broken equipment. But I needed more. I needed financial records. I needed emails. I needed the kind of smoking gun that would blow this whole operation wide open. I was formulating a plan to access Grimm's office after hours when everything fell apart. It started with a sound, or rather, the absence of one. Liam's hydraulic press, which had been maintaining its steady rhythm, suddenly went silent. Not the normal pause between operations, but a complete stop. I looked up from my sweeping to see Liam slumped over his workstation, his body limp, one hand still on the control panel. He'd collapsed. I dropped my broom and ran, my cover forgotten, my carefully maintained invisibility shattered by pure instinct. I reached him in seconds, checking his pulse, weak but present, and carefully lowering him to the floor. Someone call an ambulance. I shouted, my voice dropping the rough character I'd been maintaining, reverting to the CEO tone of command. Workers stared, frozen in shock. In this place, People didn't help each other. They'd been trained through fear to mind their own business. Now, I barked. Call 911. Someone finally moved, pulling out a cell phone. Liam was conscious but barely, his eyes unfocused, his skin clammy and pale. Classic signs of severe hypoglycemia combined with exhaustion and dehydration. His body had simply run out of fuel and shut down. I was checking his breathing when I heard the footsteps, heavy, fast, angry. Krell burst onto the scene like a force of nature, all aggression and authority. What the hell is going on here? Get that machine running. We've got quotas. He registered me kneeling next to Liam, saw the workers gathered around instead of at their stations. I said get back to work. Morrison, get away from him. This isn't your problem. I stood slowly, positioning myself between Krell and the unconscious young man. He needs medical attention. He needs to get up and stop wasting my time. Chun. Krell's voice went sharp. Get on your feet. You're not paid to sleep on the job. Liam didn't respond. Couldn't respond. And that's when Krell did something I'll never forget. He stepped forward and kicked Liam in the ribs. Not hard enough to break anything. He was too careful for that, too aware of lawsuits, but hard enough to hurt, hard enough to startle. Get up. Liam groaned, but didn't move. Krell wound up for another kick. And I snapped. My hand shot out and grabbed Krell's leg mid-swing, holding it suspended in the air. The shock on his face would have been funny in any other circumstance. Touch him again, I said quietly, all pretense of Bob Morrison gone. And you'll be the one needing an ambulance. Krell jerked his leg free, his face flushing red. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? You're a goddamn janitor. I'll have you fired and arrested for assault. No, I said, straightening to my full height, dropping the stoop I'd been maintaining. You won't. Something in my tone made him pause. Around us, workers had stopped pretending to work, drawn by the confrontation. I could feel their attention, their confusion. Bob Morrison, the meek janitor, was standing up to Foreman Krell. Krell recovered his bluster. Security. I want this man removed from the premises. Belay that order. The words came out with decades of executive authority. Silas Grimm had arrived. He stood at the edge of the crowd, perfectly dressed as always, his expression curious. He'd come to investigate the commotion, probably annoyed at the production stoppage. Now he was looking at me with narrowed eyes, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. What's going on here? Grimm's voice was calm, controlled. Krell, this janitor just assaulted me. He grabbed my leg, threatened me, and now he's giving orders like he runs the place. Grimm's eyes never left my face. Is that so? Morrison, is it? You've been here, what, a week? Something like that. And in that week, have you noticed anything interesting about our operation? The question was odd, off script. Grimm was testing me, trying to figure out why I was acting so far outside the expected behavior of a desperate janitor. I've noticed you're running a labor camp disguised as a factory, I said clearly. I've noticed systematic wage theft. I've noticed safety violations that would make OSHA weep. And I've noticed that you've created a culture of fear so pervasive that people will watch a young man collapse from starvation rather than help him, because they're afraid of losing their jobs. The silence that followed was profound. Workers stared at me like I'd just signed my own death warrant. Krell's face went purple with rage. But Grimm just smiled. A cold, calculating smile. Interesting accusations from a janitor. Tell me, Morrison, if that's even your real name, what makes you think you have any authority to make such judgments? This was it. The moment of truth. I could still back down, still maintain my cover, still gather more evidence. But looking down at Liam's unconscious form, at Maria standing in the crowd with tears in her eyes, at all the workers who'd been suffering in silence, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I reached up and wiped the grime from my face, revealing features that anyone who read business publications would recognize. I straightened my posture, dropped the character entirely. Because this is my company, I said clearly. And you're fired. The recognition rippled through the crowd like a wave. It started with the older workers, the ones who'd been at Sterling North long enough to have seen my picture in company newsletters, who'd attended the occasional corporate town hall via video feed. Holy shit, someone whispered. That's Robert Sterling. The CEO? The actual fucking CEO. Grimm's face went through a remarkable transformation, from smug confidence to confusion to recognition to a carefully controlled mask of professional concern. He was a survivor, a political animal, and he adapted quickly. Mr. Sterling. His voice was smooth, respectful, with just a hint of surprise. This is unexpected. If you'd let us know you were coming, we would have prepared a proper facility tour. I'm afraid you've caught us at a rather chaotic moment. No, I said, cutting through his corporate speak. I caught you running my factory like a sweatshop. There's nothing chaotic about that. It's systematic, deliberate, and over. The ambulance sirens were growing closer. I knelt back down next to Liam, checking his pulse again. Still weak, but steady. Grimm's mind was racing. I could practically see him calculating his next move. Sir, I'm sure this looks concerning, but there are explanations for everything you've observed. If we could perhaps discuss this in my office. We're not discussing anything. You're going to stand right there while I call my head of legal and have him start the process of terminating your employment and launching a criminal investigation into your activities. Criminal. Grimm's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the panic underneath. Mr. Sterling, I think you may have been misinformed. I watched you kick an unconscious employee. That's assault. I have recordings of you on the phone instructing someone to falsify maintenance records. That's fraud. And I have documented evidence of systematic wage theft affecting every employee at this facility. That's racketeering. Should I continue? Krell, who'd been standing frozen in shock, suddenly found his voice. Mr. Sterling, I can explain about Chun. He's been underperforming, showing up late, violating safety protocols. He's been starving. I cut him off. And you've been stealing from him. Both of you. Inventing fines, charging illegal fees, creating a system designed to extract every possible dollar from people who can't afford to fight back. The ambulance arrived, paramedics rushing in with a stretcher. I stepped aside to let them work, but kept my attention on Grimm and Krell. Maria pushed through the crowd, her face showing a mixture of hope and disbelief. Is it true? Are you really? Yes, I said gently. And Maria, I owe you an apology. I owe all of you an apology. This should never have happened. The paramedics were loading Liam onto the stretcher, checking his vitals, asking questions. One of them looked at me. Are you family? No, but I'm paying for his treatment. Take him to the best hospital in the area and tell them to bill Sterling Industries directly. Whatever he needs. As they wheeled Liam away, I pulled out my phone and made the call I should have made a week ago. Harrison? It's Robert. I need you to mobilize the entire legal team. We're shutting down operations at Sterling North effective immediately, and I want everyone's employment records, payroll data, and facility surveillance footage secured. We're going to need law enforcement, OSHA, probably the Department of Labor. And Harrison? Silas Grimm, and anyone who reports directly to him are to be escorted from the premises and placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal investigation. Grimm's careful mask shattered completely. You can't do this. I have a contract. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, I said coldly. I'd suggest you use it. Anything you say now will absolutely be used against you. I turned to address the crowd of workers, all of them staring at this surreal scene unfolding. Everyone, I need you to clock out and go home. You'll be paid for the full shift plus overtime. The facility is closing temporarily while we conduct a complete investigation and restructuring. You'll continue to receive your full pay during this period, and any illegal deductions from your paychecks over the past year will be refunded with interest. I'm also establishing a hardship fund for anyone experiencing immediate financial need. Details will be communicated through official channels within 24 hours. What about our jobs? Someone called out. Are we getting fired? No, you're getting a better workplace. When Sterling North reopens, and it will reopen, it will be under new management, with new policies, and with the kind of respect and compensation you should have been receiving all along. Krell made a move toward the exit, probably thinking he could slip away in the confusion. I caught the motion and called out, Foreman Krell, you take one more step, and I'll have you arrested for fleeing the scene of a crime. My private security detail arrived. I called them before starting my undercover operation, positioning them nearby in case of emergency. They weren't police, but they were imposing enough to make Krell freeze in place. Detain these two. I instructed them, pointing at Grimm and Krell. Don't let them access any computers, files, or make any phone calls. Local police are on their way. Grimm had one last card to play. Mr. Sterling, be reasonable. I've made this plant profitable. I've exceeded every target you've set. The board loves what I've done here. You fire me. You're going to have to explain to the shareholders why you're destroying value. It was a threat wrapped in corporate speak. He was banking on the idea that I'd prioritize profit over principles, that I'd calculate the cost of a scandal versus the cost of letting him continue. He'd miscalculated badly. The board, I said quietly, is going to have a very interesting meeting, because I'm going to tell them exactly what I found here. I'm going to show them the evidence. And then I'm going to propose that we restructure the entire company's compensation and workplace safety protocols, starting from the ground up. It'll cost millions. It'll hurt our quarterly returns. And anyone who has a problem with that can tender their resignation along with yours. I paused, letting that sink in. You thought I'd protect you because you made me money. But you made that money by stealing from people who couldn't fight back, by creating unsafe conditions, by running a system of exploitation. And I'd rather burn this whole company to the ground than let that continue. The police arrived then, multiple cars with lights flashing. I'd made sure to call the state police rather than local. I didn't know how deep Grimm's connections went in the community, and I wasn't taking chances. As they handcuffed Grimm and Krell, reading them their rights, I saw the workers watching with expressions of shock, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. Maria approached me, her eyes searching my face. Why? She asked simply. Why did you do all this? You could have just fixed it from your office. Because I needed to see it, I said. I needed to feel it. I needed to understand what I created. And I needed to know if there was anything human left inside me worth salvaging. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. And is there? I hope so, I said honestly. But that's for you and everyone else here to decide, not me. As the police cars drove away with Grimm and Krell in the back, as my security team began securing the facility, as workers started filing out with a mixture of relief and uncertainty, I stood in the middle of the factory floor and let myself really see it for the first time. Not as numbers on a balance sheet, not as a line item in a corporate portfolio, but as a place where real people spent their days, trading their time and health for money that should have been enough to live on but wasn't. I'd built this, and now I had to fix it. The question was, could I? The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media storms, and corporate chaos. The story broke on every news outlet. Manufacturing CEO goes undercover, discovers wage theft ring in his own factory. It had everything the media loved: corporate malfeasance, a dramatic reveal, a potential redemption arc. The board called an emergency meeting. Half of them wanted me to resign, arguing that the scandal was damaging shareholder value. The other half wanted me to manage the narrative and minimize the company's liability. I told them all they could go to hell. Then I presented my plan. Complete restructuring of Sterling Industries' labor policies, a third-party audit of all facilities, a new reporting system that bypassed plant management, and a $50 million fund for worker compensation and facility improvements. The stock will tank, one board member protested. Then let it tank, I said. Because I'd rather run an ethical company that makes a modest profit than an exploitative one that makes billions. 3 board members resigned on the spot. I accepted their resignations without argument, but I had work to do beyond the boardroom. I visited Liam in the hospital 3 days after his collapse. The doctors said he'd been suffering from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and exhaustion. Another few days of the same treatment, and he might have suffered permanent organ damage. He was sitting up in bed when I arrived, looking better. They'd been feeding him through and for, and some color had returned to his face. But when he saw me, his expression showed fear. Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry about the apple, about accepting food on the floor. I know it was against regulations, and... Liam, I pulled up a chair and sat down. You're not in trouble. You're never going to be in trouble for being hungry. That's not how things work anymore. He looked at me with confusion. But the rules were bullshit. All of them. The fines, the fees, the regulations that existed solely to extract money from you and your coworkers, they're gone. Grimm created them, and I'm eliminating them. I pulled out an envelope. This is a check for $47,000. It covers all the illegal deductions taken from your paychecks over the past 11 months, calculated with interest. It also includes a bonus for the overtime you worked, but were never compensated for. Liam stared at the envelope like it might bite him. I don't understand. It's your money. Money that should have been yours all along. Take it. With shaking hands, he opened the envelope and looked at the check. Then he started crying again, but this time with relief rather than despair. I can pay for Sophia's medicine. I can pay the rent. I can buy food. Real food, not just rice and, oh God. The reality was hitting him. Is this real? This isn't some kind of trick. It's real. And Liam? You're being promoted. When Sterling North reopens, you're going to be a team lead with a salary of $52,000 a year, full benefits, and a guarantee that you'll never again have to choose between feeding your daughter and feeding yourself. He couldn't speak. He just sat there, holding the check, tears streaming down his face. I stayed with him for an hour, answering his questions, listening to his story, learning about Sophia and his mother and the impossible choices he'd been forced to make. And with every word, I felt the weight of my responsibility growing heavier. This man's suffering was my fault. Not directly. I hadn't invented the fines, I hadn't kicked him while he was down. But I'd created the system that made it possible. I'd valued profit over people. And I'd almost let a good man be destroyed because I was too far removed to see what was happening in my own company. 2 weeks after the shutdown, I called a mandatory meeting for all Sterling North employees. Not a video conference, not a memo, an actual, in-person meeting where I would face the people I'd failed. We rented out a hotel conference center since the factory was still closed for renovations. Every worker was paid their full salary to attend. And when I walked into that room, I saw 200 faces looking at me with a mixture of hope, skepticism, and residual fear. Maria was in the front row. Liam was there too, holding his daughter Sophia, a beautiful 8-month-old with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. Other workers I'd observed during my undercover week filled the seats. Marcus, who'd lost 3 fingers and been fired for bleeding on the product. I'd personally visited him to apologize and offer compensation. Terry, the supervisor who'd been caught between corporate pressure and his conscience. Dozens of others whose names I'd learned, whose stories I'd heard. I walked to the podium without notes. This needed to be honest, raw, from the heart. My name is Robert Sterling, I began, and I owe you all an apology. The room was silent. 2 weeks ago, I spent a week working in your factory as a janitor. I did it because I'd received an anonymous letter telling me that people were dying. Not literally, but slowly, one shift at a time, one stolen paycheck at a time. I didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe it was exaggeration, or a disgruntled employee, or someone with an axe to grind. I paused, looking at their faces. I was wrong. Everything in that letter was true, and it was worse than I could have imagined. I watched Silas Grimm and his management team systematically steal from you. I saw safety violations that put your lives at risk every day. I witnessed assault, fraud, and a culture of fear that made you afraid to help each other. And I realized something that made me sick to my stomach. I enabled all of it. Murmurs ran through the crowd. I pressed on. I didn't personally create the fines or remove the safety guards. But I created a system that rewarded managers for cutting costs without asking how they did it. I celebrated efficiency without measuring its human cost. I looked at quarterly reports that showed increasing profits and decreasing expenses, and I never once asked why our worker turnover rate was 60%, or why our injury rate was 7 times higher than our other facilities. I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, because knowing would have required me to act, and acting would have been uncomfortable and expensive and complicated. So I chose ignorance. And you paid the price for my choice. I saw Maria nod slowly, her expression unreadable. So here's what's going to happen. Silas Grimm and Foreman Krell have been arrested and charged with multiple crimes including wage theft, fraud, and assault. They're going to prison. Every other manager who participated in or enabled their system has been fired. We're rebuilding the management structure from the ground up. But more than that, we're changing how Sterling Industries operates. Every illegal deduction you've suffered over the past 3 years, the limit of the statute of limitations, is being refunded with 10% interest. That's approximately $3. $2 million going back to you and your coworkers. Gasps rippled through the room. Effective immediately, the starting wage at Sterling North is being raised to $18.50 an hour, almost double the previous rate. Machine operators like Liam will start at $25 an hour. All positions will include full health benefits from day one, not after 90 days. We're establishing a profit-sharing program where 20% of the facility's annual profits will be distributed to workers based on tenure and performance. The facility is being completely renovated. New ventilation systems, new safety equipment, new break rooms with actual amenities. We're hiring a third-party safety inspector to conduct monthly audits, and those results will be posted publicly. We're creating an anonymous reporting system that goes directly to corporate HR and legal, bypassing plant management entirely. I paused, taking a breath. And I'm establishing the Maria Gonzalez Worker Advocacy Program, named after the woman who showed me what true generosity looks like when she split her lunch with a starving coworker. Maria, would you stand up, please? Maria rose slowly, looking shocked and uncomfortable with the attention. Maria's been promoted to Director of Employee Welfare. She'll have the authority to investigate complaints, recommend policy changes, and ensure that what happened here never happens again at any Sterling facility. She'll report directly to me, and she has my personal number with instructions to call any time, day or night, if she sees problems. The room erupted in applause. Maria's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. When the applause died down, I continued. But here's the thing I need you all to understand. I can change policies, I can fire bad managers, I can increase wages. But I can't undo the suffering you've experienced. I can't give you back the meals you missed, the sleep you lost, the fear you felt. I can't return the time you should have spent with your families, but instead spent here, working for a man who saw you as numbers instead of people. What I can do is promise you that I've learned from this, that I'll never again let myself become so disconnected from the reality of my workers' lives, that I'll fight to make Sterling Industries the kind of company you can be proud to work for, and that if I ever forget these lessons, if I ever start sliding back into old habits, I hope someone will have the courage to write me another anonymous letter. I pulled something from my pocket, the old push-broom handle I'd used during my undercover week. I'd saved it. I'm keeping this in my office, as a reminder of what happens when leaders become so isolated from reality that they forget the human cost of their decisions, and as a promise that I'll never forget what I learned pushing this broom. I looked at Liam, holding his daughter. Some of you may be wondering if you can trust these changes. If this is just damage control, just public relations. All I can tell you is this. Watch what I do, not what I say. Hold me accountable. Demand better. Because you deserve better. You've always deserved better. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Contemplative, cautiously hopeful. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, Maria, standing in the front row with tears streaming down her face. Then Liam joined in, still holding Sophia. Then others, until the entire room was on their feet, applauding. I didn't deserve their applause. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I accepted it as a down payment on the promise I'd made. The promise to be better, to do better, to never again forget that my workers were people with lives and families and dreams that mattered just as much as shareholder returns. The Sterling North facility reopened 6 weeks later, completely transformed. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they were fundamental. New safety systems, new ventilation, new equipment, new management, new policies. But the real test would be whether the culture had changed. Whether people felt safe, valued, respected. On the first day back, I arrived early and did something that probably violated a dozen corporate protocols. I put on coveralls and spent the morning working alongside the cleaning crew. Not as an undercover operation this time, but as myself, Robert Sterling, CEO, showing up to help with the dirty work because that's what leaders should do. At lunchtime, I didn't retreat to the new management offices. Instead, I grabbed my lunch, a sandwich I'd made myself that morning, and headed to the break room. The break room was no longer a dark corner with overturned buckets. We'd built an actual cafeteria with real tables and chairs, large windows that let in natural light, a kitchen area with microwaves and refrigerators, and even a small library of books and magazines for people to read during breaks. Maria and Liam were sitting together at one of the tables. Sophia was at daycare. We'd established an on-site childcare facility as part of the renovation, subsidized by the company. I approached their table, lunch in hand. Mind if I join you? They looked up, surprised but welcoming. Of course, Mr. Sterling, Maria said, gesturing to an empty chair. Please, call me Robert. I sat down and opened my lunch bag. Inside was a sandwich, nothing fancy, just turkey and cheese on wheat bread, an apple, and a bag of chips. The same kind of simple lunch that workers brought every day. I wanted to thank you both, I said. Maria, for showing me what true generosity looks like. Liam, for surviving something that should never have happened. Liam shook his head. You don't need to thank me. You saved my life. No, I corrected gently. Maria saved your life. She shared her lunch when you were starving, knowing she needed it just as much as you did. I just fixed the system that made her sacrifice necessary in the first place. There's a difference. Maria smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. You know what the best part is? I don't have to make that choice anymore. None of us do. We can actually afford to eat now. She pulled out her lunch, a hearty sandwich, a container of fruit salad, a thermos of soup. The lunch of someone who didn't have to count every penny, who could afford to feed herself properly. That's what I wanted to see, I said. That's the measure of whether I actually fixed anything, whether the people who work here can afford to live. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each of us eating. Around us, other workers were doing the same, and the difference was palpable. People were laughing, talking, relaxed. The tension that had permeated every interaction during my undercover week was gone. Can I ask you something? Liam said. Why did you really go undercover? You could have sent investigators, hired consultants, done this the normal corporate way. I thought about that. Because I'd lost touch with reality. I'd surrounded myself with reports and metrics and spreadsheets until I forgot that behind every number was a person. I needed to remember what it felt like to be powerless, to be invisible, to be desperate. Otherwise, I'd never really understand what needed to change. And now, Maria asked, now that you understand, now I have a responsibility. Not just to fix Sterling North, but to fix the entire company. To make sure every facility operates with the same principles. Fair wages, safe conditions, respect for the people who do the work. It's going to be expensive. It's going to hurt our profits. Some shareholders are going to be angry. I paused, taking a bite of my sandwich. But you know what? I don't care. Because I learned something important pushing that broom. The purpose of a company isn't to maximize shareholder returns. The purpose is to create value, real value, human value. To provide good jobs that let people feed their families, to contribute to communities, to make products we can be proud of. Everything else is secondary. Liam was quiet for a moment, then said, my daughter is going to grow up knowing that her father works for a good company, that he doesn't have to choose between feeding her and feeding himself. That matters more than I can express. I felt a lump in my throat. That's all I wanted to hear. We finished our lunch together, three people who'd been brought together by suffering, but who were now building something better. When the break ended and people started heading back to work, I stood with them. Back to it, I said. Back to it, Maria confirmed. But Robert, thank you. For everything. For caring enough to look. For having the courage to change. For being human. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. As I watched them walk back to their stations, Maria to her new office where she'd advocate for workers, Liam to his machine where he now operated with proper safety equipment and fair compensation. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. There was a picture I'd taken during my undercover week. Maria's Tupperware container, the half sandwich she'd given to Liam, the simple act of sharing that had changed everything. I set it as my phone's background image. A reminder. Because the easy part was over. I'd fixed Sterling North. I'd fired the bad actors. I'd increased wages and improved conditions. The hard part was ahead, maintaining these changes. Fighting the constant pressure to cut costs. Resisting the temptation to slip back into old patterns. Staying connected to the reality of my workers' lives even as I made decisions in boardrooms far from the factory floor. But every time I looked at my phone, I'd see that sandwich. And I'd remember what true generosity looked like. And I'd remember the cost of forgetting. 6 months later, Sterling Industries announced its quarterly results. Profits were down 15%, partly due to the increased labor costs, partly due to the extensive facility improvements. The stock took a hit. Some institutional investors sold their positions. The business press ran critical articles questioning my leadership. I didn't care, because I had different metrics now. Worker retention at Sterling North was up to 92%, highest in the company. Productivity per worker had increased 23% because people actually cared about their work. Injury rates had dropped to nearly zero. And we'd received 847 applications for 23 open positions, because word had spread that Sterling North was a good place to work. 3 other Sterling facilities had requested the same transformation. I'd approved all three, even though it would further impact short-term profits. Silas Grimm was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, wage theft, and assault. Krell got 4 years as an accomplice. Several other managers faced lesser charges. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the factory cafeteria, where workers could afford to buy lunch. It was in the payroll department, where people received fair wages for their labor. It was in the homes of workers who no longer had to choose between medicine and food, between rent and electricity. And it was in my office, where I kept that old broom handle in a place of honor. Maria called me one evening, her voice excited. "Robert, you need to come to the factory tomorrow. Lunchtime. Trust me." I didn't ask questions. I just showed up. When I walked into the cafeteria, I found a celebration. A banner that read, "Thank you," hanging from the ceiling. Tables full of food, real food, prepared by the workers themselves. And Maria, standing in the center with a plate. On it was a sandwich, split perfectly in half. "This," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "is a reminder of where we were and where we are now, of what can happen when people care more about each other than about profits, of what real leadership looks like." She handed me one half, took the other herself. "To sharing," she said. "To sharing," I echoed. And as we stood there together, workers applauding, I realized something profound. I'd spent 30 years building an empire, but it took losing everything, my identity, my power, my comfort, to finally understand what success actually meant. It wasn't about quarterly returns or stock prices or market dominance. It was about this, standing in a cafeteria, sharing a sandwich with people who'd taught me the true meaning of generosity. People who had the least but gave the most. And who, in the process, had saved me from becoming a monster.